Alright, I'm gonna nervously assume this is working. Uh, if so, hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Arden, and today we are talking about JLA The Nail. I'm experiencing a lot of lag on my end, which is why we've had a bit of a delayed start, and it still looks really weird over here. So let me just very quickly. Okay, it seems to be fine. No, we don't need to echo everything. Stop. Okay, there we go. Okay, so it seems to be working. It's just something going on here that I'm just not seeing it live on YouTube, but it is playing live on YouTube, which is all that matters. So, how's it going, everybody? We are talking about JLA The Nail today. This is normally the kind of thing I would do a scripted review for, but we've already talked about this story a long time ago as part of my top 10 Justice League stories, a list I made long enough ago that I'm not entirely sure what else is on there or how much I'd stand by those opinions, but it is interesting because for other reasons we've come back to review The Nail as a complete story. And I was like, okay, well, that's cool, but it does mean that I've already talked about this before in that video, at least a little bit. So I figured as sort of a compromise, because I've already had my scripted thoughts and that sort of thing, we might change it up a bit and do this review live so that people can kind of contribute as we go along, but also because I only have so much to say. I kind of have talked about this story a lot. We recited the whole narrow proverb when we were talking about it originally and such, so this is like the third time we're talking about the nail in some form or another, and thus it felt right to do a live review. So if it's not clear, like, I still like doing scripted reviews of scripted content that we cover on this channel, but it definitely makes sense for something like this where it's like, yeah, we're gonna kind of go live with this and just talk about it a little bit, to sort of bring us full circle, I guess. Or I'm babbling at this point, but I think you all get the basic idea. Now, with all that in mind, this is a really strong story, obviously. If I put it in the top 10 Justice League comics, it's K5 and Tevya. Thanks for joining me, by the way, in chat and such, and anyone else who is lurking on stream right now. But yeah, the choice to put it as one of my top 10 Justice League stories is because it's just so different and interesting. Like a lot of people, I really enjoy how much there's a focus on Hal Jordan kind of leading the team, because it feels as if a lot of other stories maybe would just lean into Wonder Woman instead. But Jordan really is the star of this show. He's the one who most identifies the problems around them and kind of compels the team into facing the issues that are like destroying the Justice League, basically. And I love that about it. And I noticed when the complete story came out, a lot of people really responded to that aspect of the tale in particular. It also relishes in the fact that it is an Elseworlds story, so it can get away with a little bit more than the main continuity. And as such, it really goes there. There are consequences to the fact that, like, on this basic premise, we have this Superman who's just like kind of excised out of the story. Obviously, he comes back, for those of you who have seen the complete story video that I've done on it, but it's even obvious in the promotional art and such. But that's also part of it, is the Kryptonians and Kal-El himself aren't absent from Earth, and their effect is very much felt throughout this story. Yet, this really isn't Superman's show, and we get a whole other character arc for Batman that I think is very daring. Like I said, they can get away with it because it's an Elseworlds story. It would be a whole other thing if something like this happened in the main continuity. But it also feels very like grim, dark, and miserable in such a context. Whereas in this Elseworlds thing, it defines this Batman and is interesting for him. Like, he ends up being so much closer to Selina, and ultimately, as we'll see in the sequel, she becomes his sidekick as Batwoman, which I think is really cool. Kayla was saying, good evening, loved your video on the nail. I got it on my wish list to buy on Comixology. I love that Jordan is the leader of the team. I've always been a person that wants more of Jordan in the league. Well, I agree, and that's an interesting aspect of it. I had to check. Obviously, like Hal Jordan was on the team, but I wasn't sure if it was Barry Allen or Wally West at first, because this was the 90s at a time when it was much more likely that this story would have been Kyle Rayner and Wally West as Green Lantern and the Flash, respectively. But that's just another way that this iteration of the Justice League is a little different from what was going on in the main continuity at the time. And I think it makes this graphic novel that much stronger. Well, if you call it a graphic novel. The one that Caleb has on his wish list is probably the deluxe version that includes both the Nail and Another Nail, which we're going to be covering pretty soon. And I really like that deluxe edition. There's a lot of interesting writing at the beginning by like the forwards that they put in those kind of books, all the extra covers, and just it's a really fascinating book. It's written and drawn by Alan Davis with additional art by I have it written down here somewhere, and Mark Farmer. And this really is Alan Davis's show. I know him as an artist from a bunch of stuff, and the list of comics that he's attached to is very long, but generally this is my first and really only experience with him as a writer, and he's a very good writer. I don't want to sound too surprised or anything like that, but you really wouldn't know that this guy has largely this background and focus in art based on how this story is written. Generally, artists tend to write comics a certain way when they're put in that position, and tend to do it with like a certain artist's flair. Like they tend to go more for staging these visual moments, and there's less focus on structure and just like the little finesse that a professional writer might have in their scripts. But that is not true of Alan Davis, who is a master of setting things up as he goes along. There's very little in the story that doesn't have some purpose in driving the larger narrative, or just creating this feeling of this large, lived-in DC universe with multiple teams. Even if we don't see a ton of those teams, like the Doom Patrol and the Outsiders in action, they're very much part of a story, and their appearances in the Nail are very deliberate. The Doom Patrol is important in setting up what's happening to the heroes and villains early on in the story, while the Outsiders are key for kind of letting us like in on what's going on with Metamorpho and the force field around Earth. As well, all of these things get followed up on in Another Nail, so it's really nice that Davis took the time to introduce things like the war with Darkseid and New Genesis and that sort of thing going on in space. Again, not something we really see a lot of in the Nail. It's more of just relevant for why the Green Lanterns can't show up and help Earth. But that stuff becomes very relevant and important when Another Nail shows up. So it's all very deliberate, to the extent that it almost feels as though the Nail was always intended to have two parts to it. I'm not sure whether or not that is the case, but it really feels like it. And even the time between them kind of suggests as much, because Davis took a lot of time to make these books, and it's very apparent to me. It's kind of a passion project of his, and I love the, I guess, inspiration for this story. It's talked about, people brought it up in the comments of the complete story video I put out, but also in the top 10 video where I first talked about the Nail. I introduced it with the original proverb, which has had various iterations over the centuries, and the one that they use kind of seems to come from a medieval era, but it's not like cited anywhere on Wikipedia. They have all these different iterations and talk about it and stuff. I really like the choice of it, and maybe we'll read it now, the version that's used in the Nail. For want of the nail, the shoe is lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the knight was lost. For want of a knight, the battle was lost. For want of a battle, the kingdom was lost. So a kingdom was lost, all for the want of a nail. And it's so poignant. It works on several levels. Obviously, on its most basic level, the nail itself is a physical object that destroyed a tire in one of Pa Kent's vehicles, and thus they didn't go out to town that day, didn't see Superman. Superman was instead adopted by an Amish community who just straight up abandoned the alien rocket, which was later found by the government, and that got into the custody of Luthor thanks to his government ties and stuff. He started experimenting on the Kryptonian, everything, like technology and traces of DNA they could find in the rocket, at which point ultimately he inadvertently created his undoing by creating this experimental Krypto and Jimmy Olsen genetic archetype things that ultimately lobotomized Luthor, as best I can tell, took control of him and started to create this scheme of remaking Earth into Krypton. It very much is the villain plot of the Man of Steel movie, but I just love it so much as this broken Jimmy Olsen being behind it all. So all of that started from this little nail, and that's kind of what the proverb is getting at. We let these little things either be ignored and they stumble into big problems, or in our pursuit of something small we lose something so much bigger. And in both cases, it works on several layers, not just to the main core story of the nail, but also little details. The Justice League itself makes this mistake. They let their public image and PR become trivial to them, because to the Justice League, they fight like Amazo and the League of Assassins. So public opinion, and I get it, especially when you're these heroes, they feel like it's something kind of beneath them. And just by doing good in the world, they'll just kind of naturally be accepted and beloved by the human race, is the assumption of this team, especially a character like Batman. But we learn, because they ignore this problem, a group of villains, will say, or more specifically just Jimmy Olsen, is able to use it very strongly against them, to the extent that the team almost comes crumbling down. They really are just lucky that they just kind of stumbled onto the real Kal-El and he managed to save the day for them, because otherwise they were screwed. Olsen really had them by a number and stuff, and I think that's the point of this story. Lex Luthor also makes this mistake in his pursuit of this genetic perfection. He destroyed himself, and that's really interesting, because he had this rocket, this alien rocket that gave him all this technology, so he already had more than enough to be the most exceptional and interesting human being that ever lived. But in this pursuit of potentially becoming this immortal Kryptonian hybrid, he created something that ultimately destroyed him, which I think is just so fascinating. There's also there's all these layers, and that's where I get into Alan Davis is a really good comic book writer, very careful and deliberate in what he writes and how he uses his limited time with this alternate universe. It's cool DC gave him this opportunity, because the dude freaking nailed it. There's a lot of stuff people were saying in chat, so maybe I'll divert into chat for a bit. Tevi is saying, I personally like Jon Stewart and Wally West as team leaders, but Hal as leader is interesting. Well, and that's where I agree. There's so many iterations of this. Even on our existing team, it's Hal Jordan is cool, but virtually any member of the team would have been an interesting leader and stuff, and there's definitely room for a lot of that. But I personally think that this focus on Hal really works for him. It feels in character at all times. I love how he recruits Lois Lane, which makes sense because she's just this award-winning journalist, and Hal sees the problem in a way that Batman just doesn't. And boy, does it affect Batman badly. Because he just can't look at these problems in a certain way, and he doesn't have Superman, I think, to kind of bring him out of the shadows a little bit. The character falls like no other iteration of Batman, truth be told. There's other iterations of Batman that have suffered, and obviously there's the whole Dark Metal verse and stuff, but this one just feels like it has such bite to it. The way Joker pries open Bruce's eyes while he does it, it's a real story for the Joker too, and I don't want to downplay that either. It's one of the Joker's better moments as a character in history in terms of something brutal and sadistic that he did. And what's interesting about that is it often gets overlooked for the big banner Joker stories like, death of the family, death in the family and stuff like that, and so on and so forth. And that's true of the Nail in general. I don't have anything against Kingdom Come or like those big name Joker stories or anything like that. It's just interesting to me because I feel like this one is a little less talked about. So I'm really glad that people are responding well to it in these videos we've done about the Nail, and hopefully that will continue to be the case as I'm scripting another Nail, which will be good too. Tevia says, Joker winning is very dark. I agree with that assessment, though, that the Joker won. He unambiguously won that conflict and beat Batman at his own game, so to speak. That Bruce killed him because of it almost doesn't matter, because the Joker proved whatever mad point he wanted to make. He made all the other Arkham villains fight to the death, basically, before breaking Bruce down on a level we really haven't seen before or since, per se. The exploration of that is where this story gets a little wonky, as in Selina dressing up as Robin, even with Alfred's approval, is a crazy thing for Alfred and Selina to have done to Bruce while he's so deeply traumatized. It seemed to work. It seemed to kind of stir him out of it a little bit. But if we're talking about how people with PTSD would respond to something like that, I don't think you should do that at all. It's like, I'm not an expert. It just sounded so reckless to me. And I just couldn't believe it. But so there's little things like that that do kind of make the Nail, like, a superhero comic book story. Not necessarily the most realistic thing in the world. A little goofy. But does anyone fault it for being like that? Like, it doesn't really feel wrong to me. Okay, so I'm just going to catch up on chat a little bit. Caleb was saying, I remember the art from the Kurt Busiek run of Avengers, but I'm not sure if David is the same artist. Davis. Oh, sorry. That's I got confused. I was like, who's David? But it was just a little typo. But that, I believe, is mostly George Perez, although I'm not sure. Alan Davis might have done that at one point, though. You're right. I have his stuff up here because I had a feeling it might come up. Oh, yeah, he did join later on. 38 to 43, which is still Kurt Busiek, which I know just from creating the Avengers offhand now. I'm pretty sure. Or is that John's? Here, I have it written down as well. We can check right now. Because that's a good question. The bulk of Kurt Busiek's run is George Perez, but late in the game, I don't know who did what and stuff. And I'm curious. That is a good question worth us clarifying for a second. And I have it right here. Oh yeah, that's still Kurt Busiek, because Kurt ran till 56, and Alan Davis is well within that. I don't remember what story it is. I'd have to go back and check because it doesn't have it said there. But Davis is an excellent artist too, and maybe we should talk about that a little bit, because the visual aspects of this story, he has to convey a lot of nuanced little things, like Batman's tortured experience really comes to mind, but even Ray Palmer breaks into the Thinker's headquarters. That only really goes for about 2 pages or so, and some pretty sophisticated ideas are being conveyed here, and he doesn't even do it all visually, which is almost surprising for an artist. He conveys some of that through dialogue. He does a very good job. There's a lot of very memorable looking moments when Kal-El and Jimmy Olsen throw down at the end. That's really good. And Tevye is saying, yeah, the artwork is great. Tevye is also saying, interesting, I'm surprised we didn't get a part 2 to this story. That's we've mentioned a couple times, but there is a part 2. The actual deluxe edition that most people would probably get if you are to buy it from the Comixology at this point and stuff is both stories. It just, this one, even the first one was a long and merciless edit for me and stuff, so I was wise to split it in 2 like it was originally published. So we will be talking about another Nail, which kind of deals with the fallout of all the stuff going on in space, as well as the consequences of Kal-El joining the team as Superman, which, by the way, is a beautiful, brilliant ending to The Nail. I really like how the story ends, and there's something really like fulfilling and heartfelt about how Kal joins the team and kind of restores the Justice League's image. I get that it very much kind of feeds into that narrative of how important Superman is to the Justice League and such. But it also happens while Batman is quitting the team and has no intention to rejoin based on the events of this story. I kind of like that too. So it still isn't a story beholden to the Trinity. There's nothing wrong with like Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superman being a core part of DC storytelling, but a story like this practically begs us for it not to be so. That we that the core premise of this is that the Justice League without Superman, like we look at the cover that was just there, or even one like this, and that's what we want out of this thing. It's cool when Kal-El shows up, and so meaningful because Jimmy Olsen just can't destroy him and steamroll him like he can everything else, and there's something very beautiful about that. But you don't want Superman to come and take over this alternate universe, because the core part of that alternate universe is it's one without Superman. So that's the challenge of Another Nail. We'll kind of get into that story when we get to it, and whether or not it manages to live up to that challenge. But, well, I don't, like, we'll leave it there for now. But we're going to do, like, that whole thing, and I will probably do a scripted review, because we've never talked about Another Nail before, so it should be pretty interesting. So if anyone has opinions on Another Nail, you can throw them out here, although I will ask you keep them spoiler-free for now. We'll wait till we get to the actual review before we talk about those spoilers. For the sequel, that is. Tevi is saying interesting analog for The Nail, just referring to earlier. I really think that's what distinguishes this story a little bit, but it also makes it very comparable to something like Kingdom Come, where it's a very thoughtful, thought-provoking alternate universe story. But what I like about it is it's very unique from Kingdom Come. Goes in a completely different direction and doesn't do the alternate future kind of thing. It's more of an alternate present, and that's very much felt throughout this. But what a cool aspect of that is, this thing was written and probably made from, like, it came out in 1998, but probably was worked on for like at least a couple of years before that, if not much more. So this thing was made over the course of the 90s. But you really wouldn't know it if you read it. Davis kind of wisely keeps a lot of the technological aspects of it sort of fantastical, and it gives it this timeless quality to it. But even the politics of this story, because there's very naked politics, this is very much of the era where Lex Luthor was an analog for both Donald Trump and Ted Turner. And reading this now, post-Trump presidency, is insane. It's amazing. It feels like the thing was written in response to that and is a direct criticism to Trump, which is fascinating because it's not at all. But the way they treat aliens and metahumans and do all that stuff until the conspiracy starts to unravel a little bit, even in the people who are like kind of putting all this propaganda out into the public, like they start to just sound crazy, saying like the aliens are behind everything. But you kind of see how we build towards that and stuff, and I thought it was so well handled. And the reason it feels like it applies so well to Trump is not that Davis was specifically thinking of that individual when he wrote Lex Luthor or any of this, but because Davis is talking about this larger trend of authoritarianism, and because he did it in a very timeless, sort of generic way. We aren't talking about immigrants, even though that's a very obvious analog for it, but it also just works for outsiders in general and how they are treated by society. And because of all that, it really just will apply to a lot of things, far beyond like a Trump presidency or anything like that, far beyond American politics. And that's something that I think really works for The Nail, and something I really appreciated for it going through it for the complete story. Caleb says, I can already tell people reading this story and saying finally killed the Joker. But and that's true, and I agree. But it gets into, it's a very interesting answer to how the DCEU treats Batman historically and stuff, and how Zack Snyder approached that character. But like, and there's all that, but it's interesting because he kills the Joker, but it kind of breaks Batman, and he quits the team, turns himself into the authorities, and kind of thinks he should be in jail. The courts look at the case and are like, no, this was the most reasonable killing ever, and basically lets Batman go free. But the dude is kind of broken from then on, and just is like, okay, I'm just going to be Batman until I die, seeking redemption. And it's not super suicidal per se, but he just views what he did as a fundamental betrayal of what it is to be a member of the Justice League, and kind of the original promise of what it was to be Batman. And I love that as writing, but it is also kind of funny where it's like, yeah, it's like, if we wanted to kill Happy Batman and this is the direction they went with that character in the DCU, that would be quite interesting. But it's just, this book is so much more mature with how it approaches the concept of murder, compared to that entire film franchise. I am chuckling a little bit, and I think Caleb might be a bit too. And same with Tevia. There's a couple people laughing in chat. And I assume we're all kind of digging at the same thing there. J-Pod said, I've had the Nail issues forever, but I don't think I've ever read it. I need to go and finally read this soon. You know, I'm laughing at that a little bit, J-Pod, because I relate to that so much. The amount of books, like, sitting over there that I haven't read. Like, you guys usually can see that wall a little better when I'm, like, pre-recording content and stuff. Or on my Comixology account is borderline insane. No, I don't. Okay, that was ableist. But, like, it's just, like, you know, you have to be in the right mood to read certain books and stuff, so you shouldn't feel bad about that. But I would highly recommend it. I really enjoyed the experience of reading this, little surprises along the way, the details that someone as a fan of DC Comics will recognize that change because this is an alternate universe and stuff, and all that fun little bits. Even Jon and Martha Kent, who realistically shouldn't have much of a role in this story given what happens to the characters and how they never really encounter Kal-El until much, much later in life. They are so significant in this story because of, just little things. And it all makes sense. There was a secret lab established near Smallville because the government found the rocket there. Because of that, the Kents, being who they are, ultimately started a little refugee camp for metahumans. And then the battle against Jimmy Olsen spills out of that research base, leading all the superheroes to encounter Kal-El, and leading Kal-El to ultimately encounter the Kents for the first time. And it's very cool that they have this connection, even though it's not parental anymore. And things have changed in this alternate universe, but because these are still the same people, they still have the same personalities and stuff, when they see Kal-El just weeping at pain for his parents in this universe, they just step in and give him comfort, and it's lovely. It's one of those it's the second last image we see of this entire run, is them just hugging Superman while all the other superheroes kind of look on. And I can't really think of a better way to wrap up this review, and J-Pod is saying this book sounds fascinating, and we're kind of near the end of what people said in chat, but Nicholas Corrin says, it's the return of Kang and the Scarlet Centurion story arc in reference to what Alan Davis did for the Avengers. Thank you. That saves me having to look it up during stream, and dang, that so the Kang arc in particular really stands out in my memory from grading the Avengers, and going through all these books and reviewing them and stuff. And Davis is a solid dude in terms of the content he creates, so make sure y'all stay tuned for another Nail as we talk about that. I am just switching over to his Wikipedia page, and it looks like he's still quite active, including making Marvel books and stuff like that. He did a bunch of Thanos graphic novels recently, it looks like, although just as an artist, which isn't a dismissive thing. It's just worth pointing out that it gets into what I was saying. I largely know him as an artist and stuff. And he worked on, I think, S.H.I.E.L.D. and such recently, Conan for a couple issues here and there. He looks like the kind of artist who really takes his time with his content and really puts in a lot of work into these graphic novels and stuff, rather than just belting out content after content. So it's a very interesting creator, and I'm glad we had a chance to talk about him today, because damn did he do a good job. Oh, I accidentally closed that, so I'm maybe that's good enough time to end things here. But thank you so much, guys. This was a really fun review, and I really appreciated the back and forth. Even just all the comments and responses to the actual complete story were great, and I'm glad everyone really liked it. And I hope J-Pod enjoys reading the book. It's really easy when you already have it. And that is a nice thing. And sometimes it's a nice thing about, like, because I'll sometimes see a review for a movie where I already know I have access to it, and that does sometimes make things easier. So hopefully that's the case here. But K5, take care as well. One last thing. We're done talking about the nail for now, but if anyone, because a good chunk of our viewers are Canadian as well, I just voted today. You should too if you haven't yet. You still got plenty of time. It is 1:30 p.m. EST as of now, and polls, at least around here, won't close for another 8 hours. So, yeah, please do that. I don't really care who you vote for, but this whole system doesn't really work unless everyone votes. So, thanks. And, America, you always got stuff going on in terms of voting, so you should vote too. And we'll see you guys next time here on Comic Island.